What is going on, Headliner Nation? Welcome back to the Fantasy Headliners, and I have got a ton of quarterback information for you today. We've got another member of the 2023 draft class that's been sent to the bench this year. We got a couple of guys injured with no idea if they're going to play or not, and we need some upside from Patrick Mahomes for once. Will we get it this week? But Headliner Nation, it is time to lock in. Turn the volume up, put the earbuds in, let's roll with it. Thursday Night Football, CJ Stroud and Aaron Rodgers. It's never ideal for your quarterback to be missing his top two wide receivers. It certainly isn't ideal for him to be missing them on Thursday Night Football, going up against the defense that allows the 6th fewest fantasy points to the quarterback position. CJ Stroud could really struggle this week. Yeah, he still has Tank Dell and Dalton Schultz, and they should be able to run the ball with Joe Mixon as well. But CJ Stroud's upside is a lot lower than what we've seen in previous contests. Even though Houston has not had their bye week as of yet, they still allow the 7th fewest passing yards to opposing quarterbacks. But here's the kicker. They allow the 2nd most passing touchdowns to quarterbacks right now. So driving the ball down the field is definitely difficult against this defense. But once you get into the red zone, scoring is absolutely there. You can also find your way into some big play touchdowns against them as well. Aaron Rodgers, hopefully in week number 3 with Davante Adams being back, can find a little bit of a better ceiling than what we've seen so far. But I think we're going to see basically what we've had the last couple of weeks. Maybe about 250 passing yards, a couple of passing touchdowns, and I think we can lock him in for an interception as well. Dak Prescott now has 3 straight games with 2 interceptions, and he's thrown 2 interceptions in 4 of their 7 games this season. That kills his fantasy upside. And even in a matchup going up against Atlanta that's pretty decent, you have to be very concerned that if he doesn't take care of the football this week, it doesn't matter how many yards he's putting up. He's going to start taking fantasy points away from himself, and if he's not offsetting those with touchdowns, it's going to make things really difficult for him to lock into the top 12 quarterbacks. I'm sure if you have any ownership stake in Atlanta football players, you wish they played the Tampa Bay defense every single week. But they're going to be going up against Dallas this week, and we'll see how much longer Micah Parsons is going to be sidelined. If he can come back this week, that will be good news for Dallas, trying to limit the upside of Kirk Cousins. I don't think Kirk Cousins is all of that of a risky play this week. Even if his ceiling isn't that high, he still has plenty of weapons. They're going to run the football well. They're going to do a lot of that running the football. And even if he can't find himself throwing more than 2 touchdowns, give me 250, 2 touchdowns, a lot of running the ball on the ground, and Atlanta potentially walks away with a win. I mean, for the most part, Tua's return last week was successful. Didn't have nearly the ceiling that we've seen from him, but it wasn't a bad performance either, and it might take him a couple of weeks before he does get himself back into top 12 or top 6 quarterback status. And just because Josh Allen is a medium risk for me doesn't mean that I'm sitting him, and it doesn't mean that I don't think that he's a top 10 quarterback still this week. Miami's defense has been pretty successful at limiting big plays to quarterbacks so far. And Miami is currently allowing the fewest fantasy points per game to the quarterback position. That might limit Josh Allen's upside a little bit this week through the air. But as long as he picks up some yards on the ground and potentially adds a rushing touchdown as well, he should still be super solid with a really nice ceiling, and the floor will definitely be okay to go with it. Right now, the Cincinnati defense has allowed the 6th most passing touchdowns to quarterbacks, and they're allowing the 3rd most fantasy points to quarterbacks as well. Now, the reason that the fantasy points are a little bit higher than the touchdowns is because they're also allowing the most rushing yards to quarterbacks. You may not need to worry about that when it comes to Gardner Minshew, but if they can find a way to drive the ball down the field a little bit, Minshew could have a couple of touchdowns up his sleeve this week. He could also have a couple of interceptions up his sleeve as well. We saw Joe Burrow a lot closer to his floor this past week than the ceiling he has shown us so far this season. And if T. Higgins can come back this week, it really helps his opportunity to get back to that ceiling that we've noticed from him up until last week. But the major concern is that Cincinnati runs the ball all over Las Vegas, and Joe Burrow just doesn't end up having the counting stats needed to be inside the top 6. I would definitely say he's got top 12 floor, and his ceiling is probably around the same area this week. We finally saw Justin Herbert hit his ceiling this past week, his first performance inside the top 12 quarterbacks. And I would love to start seeing that way more often. And maybe we're going to be on the verge of that. And I think a similar performance this week is absolutely in the cards. Now, does he get inside the top 12 once again? Maybe, but I definitely think he's in that QB 8 to QB 14 range against Cleveland. Hey, Jameis Winston was my Manscaped must-start quarterback last week, and that was an excellent call going up against Baltimore. But not this week going up against the Los Angeles Chargers. Right now, the LA Chargers are allowing the 4th fewest passing yards and 2nd fewest passing touchdowns to quarterbacks. This matchup is not going to be nearly as easy as it was last week against the Ravens, and we could see some of those patented Jameis Winston interceptions this week, so just be a little bit more cautious if you're trying to roll them out. Even if it was Drake May and not Jacoby Brissett, I would still be a little cautious with this matchup. Detroit made Tennessee look really bad last week, but part of that was the special teams by Tennessee not really setting their defense up for success anyway. We'll see how Tennessee ends up bouncing back, but with Jacoby Brissett probably being the starter this week, I don't really have any interest in trying to roll him out. Mason Rudolph found a little bit of magic up against that Detroit secondary last week. He didn't play all that bad, and I think he really outperformed what a lot of people were expecting on the road in a very hostile environment. Now, against New England this week, I don't think it carries over, so I'm not willing to even try and risk rolling him out this week. He's probably still going to throw a pick or two, and New England gives up quite a bit of yards through the air, but honestly, trying to score on them is where things would be really difficult, and I would be leaning on the run game against them once again. For a guy that was a game time decision last week, Jayden Daniels didn't look all that bad, and he didn't have the ceiling that we've become used to, but he was still pretty solid in terms of his floor. The Hail Mary pass at the end of the game obviously helped out his stats quite a bit, but another week of rest hopefully will get him ready to go against the Giants, who are currently allowing the 4th fewest passing yards and 4th fewest touchdowns to the quarterback position. But here's the kicker with it. They allow quite a bit of rush yards and rushing touchdowns. And we know that's Jayden Daniels' bread and butter. So this week, he's definitely a low-risk player once again. The Washington pass defense over the first few weeks of the season definitely looked like it was in trouble. In fact, the entire Washington defense looked like it would be. But they have progressed every single week since then, and they look a lot better now. So the surface stats may make it look like Daniel Jones is going to be a solid start this week, but I don't know if I would be ready to lock into that. There's still no word on whether or not Derek Carr will actually be returning this week. If it does happen, I think he's a low-risk play going up against this defense. Even though he's missing a couple of more wide receivers than he was the last time he was on the field, he should still give you some pretty solid numbers. Now, if you're in a deeper league, 2 quarterbacks, super flex, whatever it may be, and you absolutely need somebody and you're desperate for a second starter, you could probably take a look at Spencer Rattler, and he could probably get the job done as well. New Orleans is allowing the 4th most passing yards on the season, so if Andy Dalton is the starter this week, I absolutely like that matchup. There's going to be some risk with it, but I'll take him to still get some of those yards. But they're missing Deontay Johnson now, and there's no word on whether or not Adam Thielen will be back this week. So if it ends up being Bryce Young at quarterback, we may not want to go that route. Bo Nix has been a top 10 quarterback 3 of the last 4 weeks, and it's a little bit easier to become a top 10 quarterback when your offensive game plan is throw the ball 30 plus times almost every single game. So even though from an efficiency standpoint, Bo Nix hasn't been all that good, he's throwing the ball a ton right now, and that is leading to some pretty decent upside, especially when you find yourself in some really reasonable matchups. And Baltimore is currently allowing the most passing touchdowns, the most passing yards, and the 3rd most fantasy points to quarterbacks. So absolutely Bo Nix could have himself another really solid day, but does he outscore Lamar Jackson? That's going to be something that we'll be keeping our eye on in this quarterback battle this week. It is a very difficult matchup for Lamar Jackson. Now they just added Deontay Johnson, and there's no word yet on whether or not he'll actually play this week because he is technically listed as questionable, and even if he does play, does he see a ton of volume? For Lamar Jackson this week, hopefully we pick up a few yards on the ground, maybe a rushing touchdown to go with it. And if he can do those things and have a pretty decent day through the air, he should still be a top 12 quarterback with no problems. I don't plan on seeing a whole lot of upside from Trevor Lawrence in this matchup. First off, the Philadelphia pass defense has gotten better and better since week 1. The young guys are starting to step up, they're already developing, and it's become tougher and tougher to throw the ball on them. But the biggest issue is the lack of weapons because Christian Kirk is done for the year. We still don't know if Brian Thomas Jr. is going to be ready to go, and Gabe Davis has been banged up as well. Trevor Lawrence is probably left on your bench this week if you're looking to play it safe. Jacksonville may be in trouble this week facing Jalen Hurts, and Jalen Hurts may be one of the biggest locks to finish as a top 3 quarterback. Not only does Jacksonville allow the most fantasy points to quarterbacks and the most passing yards to quarterbacks, but Jacksonville also allows the most rushing yards to quarterbacks. Jalen Hurts is in for a huge week. Caleb Williams had been really hot going into his game last week with Washington, and unfortunately that ceiling that we had seen from him kind of disappeared. Okay, kind of isn't even the right word there. It completely disappeared. So there is just a little bit of concern about, does he get back on track? Were those few games that we saw from him kind of a fluke? And do we see him kind of come back down to that floor? Arizona is a good matchup, and it absolutely is going to allow Caleb Williams the opportunity to get back on track. But once again, just playing it a little bit cautious, I think he has the ceiling of a top 10 quarterback, but I also feel like he could be destined for top 15 as well. I may be going out on a limb with this call this week, and it could end up biting me in the butt, but Kyler Murray is going to be my Mando must-avoid quarterback of the week. I absolutely hate this matchup for him going up against Chicago this week, and I personally would like to try and find somebody that might be a little bit safer to put in at the quarterback position. The Chicago defense is currently allowing the fewest fantasy points per game and passing touchdowns to quarterbacks. And last week against Jaden Daniels, if it hadn't been for that Hail Mary, they probably would have held him in check for a majority of the game as well. Kyler Murray has finished outside the top 12 quarterbacks 4 times this season. And if it wasn't for a 44-yard touchdown run a couple of weeks ago, it probably would have been 5. We're either getting big games from him or we're getting duds from him. He's not really getting us anything right in the middle. And going up against Chicago this week in this tough matchup, personally, I'm looking to just avoid it altogether. But the question really becomes, are you avoiding Kyler Murray the same way that Mando helps you avoid odors? Because if you are, you should be heading over to Shop Mando and getting one of their starter packs for 40% off the price by using code word headliners. Mando's clinically proven formula protects you against odors for up to 72 hours. So if you find yourself in the heat of the moment this fantasy football season and you need to make sure you're not too overwhelming, let's go ahead and run with Mando to help us get there. Over the last 5 games, the Detroit Lions have scored more touchdowns than what Jared Goff has in completions. That has to be one of the most insane football stats I have ever heard, and I've been doing this for almost 10 years now. Yeah, from a fantasy perspective, maybe Jared Goff isn't the most high-end quarterback that you're going to find because Detroit runs the football so much. But Jared Goff also may be one of the safest bets that you can make at the quarterback position every single week. He had 4 interceptions in the first 3 games of the season and hasn't thrown an interception since. The ceiling isn't there for Jared Goff, but he absolutely has a good enough floor that if you need to run him out there, then you should be more than willing to do that in 1 quarterback leagues. If you're in a 2 quarterback or a super flex league, then Jared Goff is absolutely the perfect number 2 QB. Right now, we are in a holding pattern to see what's going to happen with Jordan Love. Fortunately for him, it doesn't sound like that growing strain that he has is going to be something that hampers him for several weeks, but it is something that may keep him out against Detroit this week. If he ends up playing, this is a great matchup for him and he needs to be in your lineup. If he doesn't end up playing and it's Malik Willis, I don't know if I'm willing to go that route as of yet. We'll dive into that a little bit more as the week goes on. We'll talk about it in the live shows, but as of right now, I would say Malik Willis is absolutely high risk, and Jordan Love is as well until we know whether or not he's starting or even limited. With Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp back, it feels like Matthew Stafford is going to get rolling once again, and if he does, he has a fairly high ceiling each and every week, and definitely a really nice floor. Seattle's defense has been up and down this season. They have some good games, they have some bad games. You definitely can run on them, but we know LA is going to throw the ball a lot. And right now, his projections over on Underdog have him listed at 247.5 passing yards. I feel like it's going to be higher than that this week. Going up against Seattle, this is a divisional game that they absolutely need to have to keep themselves in the playoff race. And if they get this win, they're going to be looking a lot better than they did just a couple of weeks ago. And for Geno Smith, a lot of his upside depends on DK Metcalf. This is a way better offense when Metcalf is on the field than when they don't have him. And last week, that showed a little bit. He does a lot of things in this offense that help spread the field and give other guys good opportunities as well. And of course, he's a beast in his own nature. So if we can get DK Metcalf back, Geno Smith looks in a much better position than if they were to be missing him for another week. If they're missing DK Metcalf this week, I'm just lowering that ceiling on Geno Smith. If LA scores points, we know Seattle's going to throw the ball 35 or 40 times in the game. So the volume alone gives him a really nice floor, but turnovers could end up being an issue, and that's where the ceiling comes down. If you've been hanging on to Joe Flacco, here you go. If you cut Joe Flacco to waivers and he's still out there, go get him. It sounds like Indianapolis is going to turn it over to Joe Flacco for the foreseeable future, at least until the end of the season, as long as Flacco stays healthy. That's terrible news for Anthony Richardson. It's great news for fantasy owners because Joe Flacco makes this offense way more stable, and in his own right, in a really good matchup, just like he has against Minnesota, he absolutely has top 12 potential. If you have Joe Flacco, go ahead and roll him out. And Sam Darnold has a solid floor this week with some nice upside as well. Now, his upside probably doesn't push him into the top 6, 7, 8 range, but anywhere from 10 to 12 is absolutely reasonable. And if for some reason they run an awful lot on Indianapolis, as long as he can find the end zone a couple of times and throw for over 200 yards, he should still be right on that borderline of being a QB1 or a high-end QB2. Baker Mayfield showed us last week that he may not be slowing down this season. Even with no Mike Evans and Chris Godwin, he still had a really solid fantasy day, but that matchup was way better than this matchup that he's going to be getting here. So unfortunately for this week, we may need to pivot off of Baker Mayfield and go with somebody that offers us way more upside, because in this matchup, I don't think Baker has it. I tell you what, Patrick Mahomes could really use a big game, like top 5, because fantasy owners have been dying for it for weeks. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers allow the most fantasy points per game to the quarterback position. Patrick Mahomes needs to get going, and this is absolutely a great opportunity for him to do so. Yo, Headliner Nation, there you have it. All of the start and sit episodes for week 9 of the NFL season. And don't forget, we are still waiting on some pieces of information, whether it's an injured guy or starters or something along those lines. So keep an eye on the channel. We're going to be dropping ranking shows from late Wednesday night all the way through the day on Thursday to get you updated before Thursday night football. And if there's anything else that may pop up, make sure you come back Saturday night for our live show, especially since this week is the Halloween episode. Everybody have a great rest of the day. Peace out, stay safe, and stay healthy. And I'll catch you all on the next episode of the Fantasy Headliners.